Welcome to the Rock is George podcast. I'm your host, George Dionne. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to hit like, follow, or subscribe on the platform that you're listening to us on. You can also check out my work at the loudest.com on the planet, knac.com, for exclusive hard rock and heavy metal interviews, live show coverage, album reviews, and more. My guest for episode 216 is Swedish guitarist Tommy Denander of the all-star project Radioactive. Now, the name Tommy Denander probably doesn't ring a bell with a lot of listeners, and that may be just because Tommy likes to be the guy in the background when it comes to songwriting and guitar playing and compositions. Tommy has worked with numerous musicians throughout the years, from Michael Jackson to Alice Cooper to Deep Purple, Ricky Martin, Jeff Beck, Richard Marx, tons and tons more. As I mentioned, his Radioactive project is an all-star event. In fact, the very first Radioactive album featured members of Toto. You'll hear more about that later. His current album under the Radioactive banner is called Reset. It was released on October 11th through Frontiers Music. And here's Tommy Denander to tell you more about it. If I knew absolutely nothing about Radioactive, how would you describe the music to me?
Horrible, just awful. It's a 33-year journey of my life. I am, because I grew up being in bands from late 70s through the 80s. I was signed early 80s. Being in bands is always tough because I was always the driven force. And when you're too driven in bands, some other people get lazy. So I kept coming back to doing bands all the way up to 1990. And that band was put together with what I thought were some of my best friends, with the purpose of having a band where no arguments would happen. And I've never had more issues. So when I left that group, I said never again. And I took my songs from it, songs I had written in 88, 89, when I was 20, 21 years old. And in 1991, I met the guys in Toto on tour in Sweden. We were already friends because I moved to LA in 87. So I was good friends with them. That meeting, I basically asked them, if I get a record deal, would you play on my album? Because I never really thought about doing a solo thing. And they were like, yeah, we would. So I was like, okay. And by coincidence, a friend of mine from Sony Records was there at this show in Sweden. And I went up to him and said, if you sign me, because he knew me, if you sign me, the guy's going to play on the album. And he went, really? So he asked the guys on the flight back, and he said, dude, sign him, we'll play on it. So that's how Radioactive started. So I took those songs that I had written for almost melodic heavy metal band in the late 80s. They became the core sound of the first album. I changed them enough to where I recorded them with the Toto guys as my backing band. I had Jeff, Mike, Steve Carr, David Page, and me doing the tracking for it. We made them less heavy metal, but they were still a very rocking album. But again, I wrote those songs when I was 20, 21, so it's like a lifetime ago. So it developed from that. So to explain the sound over these years, it's sort of a rockier version of a classic rock Toto-ish kind of sound. But over the years, my influences from very much Peter Gabriel, some Mr. Misters, some Survivor, some Journey. A lot of classic bands have entered into this. And my experience after 40 years of working in the business, and especially being songwriter mainly, which is studio musician and songwriter, you grow as a writer. So I kind of incorporated all of my knowledge into a sound that people often say, oh, that has to be your song. I can tell it's you from songwriting and playing. So the short answer to your question would be, it's very much classic melodic rock, but my twist is that I try to keep the original 80s feel with a kind of modern production without sounding too much like modern rock. It still has the true vibe of it, because I'm old enough to have grown up and played and worked through all those golden years, you know, so.
Well, let's talk about your latest album. It's your 6th album under the Radioactive banner. It's called Reset. There it is right there.
I got it.
Came out on October 11th through Frontiers Music. In the press materials, you're calling this a return to form that you just described, on par with your early albums. Where did Radioactive take you over the last 23 years that you felt you had to reset the sound?
Good question, and very much the reason why the album is called, 2 reasons why it's called Reset. Those songs I did on the first one, we recorded the basic tracks in 1991. But I wasn't happy with the deal I had with Sony, so I ended up buying the album back from them. And I spent 10 years working on it until it was actually released in 2001. And it had 35 big legends on it, from David Foster to Fee Waybill from the Tubes to Jason Sheff, Chicago. And I had Bobby Kimball, Fergie Frederiksen, and Joseph Williams from Toto. And I mean, just this endless list of amazing people that over 10 years ended up on it. For me, it was always, and I said it in interviews, this is a once-in-a-lifetime project. I never wanted to be a solo artist. I'm not a singer, and this is that one magical thing you do. And we did it and released it, and it sold a lot, and it went up on the charts around Europe and in Japan and everywhere. So the label, you know, after a few months said, so what do you want to do for the next one? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, this is it, you know. And I mean, they were the ones suggesting maybe you should call it something except Tommy Denander, because it's easier to sell a band name than a solo thing. And I'm like, I'm fine with that, because I'm not the singer anyway. So that's why I came up with the name Radioactive. So when they started saying, well, now you've built something that's doing really well, it would be stupid of you to not continue it. I went, oh, I never thought about that. So I'm like, well, I mean, it's like 15 years later almost from when I started writing these songs, and I'm a little different person and writer and stuff. So my initial thought for the second album is I want to keep the Toto sound a bit, but I want to make it more like Toto's Isolation, kind of a rockier Toto sound. And I was working a lot with Fergie Frederiksen from that album and Bobby Kimball and stuff during those years. So that became the second album, and it again did really well. For the third one, I was sort of stuck in between those two in style. And I did the first one in 2001, the second one in 2003, the third one in 2005. So they were pretty close to each other. So they stayed in that sort of Toto kind of rocking thing, added more and more guests to it. After that, my career took off pretty big in a lot of ways. So it took 10 years before I actually decided to do the fourth one in 2015. Again, many years since the first one. That fourth one is one of the most successful ones, with Jimmy Jameson and a lot of great people on it. And I even went number one on the iTunes charts and stuff. It did really well, that album. But I kind of, after that, for the fifth album, I kind of went through a lot of different projects and styles, went into more of a, almost at times, mix of an AC/DC Van Halen-ish kind of rock sound that I wanted to do. And the feedback from the last album was, you know, I really liked your album, but I really missed the sound of the first album, like that, the really early ones. And I went, and I kept hearing this, and I was like, okay. And I never listened to my own music, and because I don't have to tour with it or anything. So I rarely go back, maybe a song once in a while you think of it. And so I went back and I started listening to it. I went, oh, wow. It's been a 33-year journey since I recorded the first one. And I still feel like I know this style of music well, but I have the maturity of being who I am today. So I wanted to reset my sound, not to please the people who said they missed it, but it felt right to me. I always go from what I want to do. But I had this song, the title track, that one of my best friends and my mentor is the legendary producer MUTT LANGE. He gave me this song about a year and a half ago. He just sent it to me, and I was like, wow, this is cool. What is it? It's just a song. With him, it's not, he will never tell you, well, here's the song, maybe if you want to record it. But his demo of it was so different. It's basically just a little drum machine and a synth loop and him singing. It was a beautiful song, and it was like, cool. I never thought about it being for Radioactive until I one day heard, this is how I should do that song. So I rebuilt the whole track and got all of his files and did this. And he actually loves this version. He really, really loves the video and everything, which is a big thing because he rarely says anything like that. He'll say, well, good, you know, but he's not the kind of guy who goes, oh, this is great, you know, good. He's not that kind of person. He's very private and laid back. So that was a cool thing. But I got the title for the album from his song, Reset, that he and Tony Nilsson, a good friend of mine, wrote. So it was that double meaning of that song felt good, but I'm also kind of resetting my sound. And I do the artwork for all my albums myself. It's something I've done for many, many years. So I had an idea at first. It was cool. It wasn't what I wanted. I tried some other versions. I even started playing around with the first Radioactive album has this cover that looks like some chemical lab with eyes on robot arms looking up. It's a radioactive freaky thing. It looks pretty cool. So I had an idea of making a modern version of what happened to that lab. And while doing all of this is when I sort of came up with the idea that we have now, which is this guy standing looking at the 6 holes, and each hole represents the albums. So and I wanted it to be this clean, almost like a Genesis, Pink Floyd kind of very clean cover with just a guy looking at these holes. Anyone who cares about artwork might go, I wonder what that means. There are a couple of people who said, I see it's got 6 holes. It's got to be the albums, right? Some people who care about it. I'm like, that's exactly what I meant. So within all of these stories, and that title is the reason why I'm sort of resetting the sound. And the beautiful part is the album has amazing feedback. It was even picked this week as one of the tracks of the week from Classic Rock Magazine in England for people to vote from it. And it's just one of those albums you do where it blows up bigger and other stuff. So it feels like I really want to make the next one keep going in this direction for a while, and it feels good. So long answers, but everything tied together in a hopefully logical way.
Well, you mentioned that Mutt demoed the song Reset, but you have Robin McAuley on vocals for that one, and I know that you've worked on both his solo albums, so it kind of makes sense that you brought him on board.
Absolutely. I completely adore Robin McAuley as a human and as a singer. It's got to be one of the greatest rock singers. You know, as good as he ever was, he's all the way up there. But he also sang on the last Radioactive on a song that I wrote with Mutt called Move It. And he did some other stuff as well. And because Mutt sings the demos when we work together, and Mutt is by far one of the greatest singers in the history of music ever. Bryan Adams is like, I'm not recording an album unless Mutt sings it like first so I can copy him. And Def Leppard, everything you hear is basically Mutt, and they copy what he do. And anyone in the music business is like, well, maybe we should try to get one of those, you know, that kind of Mutt Lange backing vocal thing. He is by far like the greatest singer ever. And I tease him. I said, you do understand that you're cheating this world out of a solo album from you. People will never really truly hear it. And he goes, because he would never do it in a million years. He's too shy and he doesn't care about that stuff. But it's surreal. He's like an alien how good he is. So when you have somebody like that on your demo, it's not like you can just bring in anyone. So I was like, who can do this? And I sent from the last album, I sent the song to Robin because we had been working on his solo stuff and a bunch of other albums where we worked on together. and even he said, well, it almost scares me to like try to sing this to like match his vocals, but I'll do my best. And he nailed it. So and on this one as well, he went, here we go again. It's like trying to push myself up to that bar that Mutt says. It's not easy, but he can do it. He and Mutt agrees because they're similar in style with their singing. So I think he did a fantastic job on this song, as always, and I can't wait to do more with him anyway. So I'm gonna push Mutt that hopefully we can do something for the next album so I can bring Robin back again. So.
Now, you mentioned that Mutt is some kind of alien. You actually have the lead singer of Alien on your opening track, Sentimental, Jim. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name. Jidhed?
Yeah, Jim Jidhed. Jidhed. It's a hard Jidhed. Sounds like that. Jidhed. Yeah. And funny enough, he sings one of the songs that Mutt and I co-wrote. So talk about aliens meeting there. So yeah, and again, incredible singer, friend for 25, 30 years. Speak to him almost daily right now because on October 30th, he is releasing for the first time digitally the soul album I produced for him 20 years ago. It's turning 20 now. His soul album called Full Circle, where we had an unreleased song by Steve Perry and some other stuff, and we co-wrote some, and he wrote a lot of it. And so that one is turning 20 and for the first time coming out digitally. And I think he's planning to do a vinyl of it. I don't know if he's still doing that. But so we've been in touch over these years. I've been helping Alien with their new album they have done, which is a great album. I've only been helping Jim a little bit, like going through lyrics and like checking stuff. They've done the album completely without me. So, but he's also one of those singers. He's up there. He sounds like Steve Perry, but that's just the way he was born. But he's up there with the greatest. And for this album, if you look through the 5 albums I've done, most of them have had 6, 7, 8, 9 singers, almost one per song. Because I always, not being a singer, sorry, maybe once in a while you have a singer do 2 songs. You know, it used to be that. It was Fergie Fredrickson who coined the phrase "bro deal," like, you know, hey, I want you to play or co-write on my album. You know, how much do you want? I was like, well, I'll work on your album if you sing on mine. Cool, let's do the bro deal. You help me, I'll help you. So we've sort of done this over the years. So every time I work with a singer that I really love, and they were like, wow, thank you for doing this. You know, how much do I owe you? Well, instead of paying me, why don't you sing on my next Radioactive? That'd be great. And it becomes a win-win, you know, because we get 2 albums each out of everything we do. So that's sort of what I did. But for this one, I kind of started it a little bit on the last album where I wanted fewer singers and the ones I picked sounded more similar to get more of a band sound. So this time I said to Jim, you need to do 4 or 5 songs. I'll help you with your next solo album. Let's do a deal. But I want you to be like half of the album. And they said, okay, cool, you know. And so that was a good start. But then there's like one of my favorite people and singers in the world is Jeff Parris. I mean, talk about legends in the melodic rock world. And he's been on Radioactive before on several songs, backing vocals and lead vocals. And even in interviews, he often says it's some of the favorite work he ever did. And we love working together. And I've been to his house. We've co-written. We're like good friends. But he's one of those, nah, I'm too old. I think I'm going to retire. And I'm like, Jeff, you're alive. You sing as well as you ever did. And stop whining. Let's just work. And so I basically forced him to be the second half of the album. So Jim and Jeff would do 4 songs each, which is great because they are the core sound of the album. Amazing work. I needed Robin to do that song. And my good friend Joe Vanna from the band MECCA, I've done a lot of work with. And his son, I've known since he was a very little boy. He's grown up to become an amazing singer himself. He and Joe share vocals with MECCA, and I heard the last album that I worked on. I was like, damn, he's starting to sound good. So Joe was like, dude, you need to get Joey on the album. I said, you know what? Absolutely. So I found a perfect song for him. And then on the internet, I found this incredible unknown guy. I think he's from like Romania, but he lives in Dubai. Works at like the Hard Rock Cafe in Dubai, singing everything from Toto Journey to Michael Bolton to whatever, any style. And it was like, I saw these videos and it's like, this is one of the greatest singers I've heard out there. So I tracked him down and I said, you know, we need to work. You need to be signed. And so Frontiers are absolutely interested in this guy. His name is Harris ZINDANI. So I got him to do a song on this album, which turned out really, really good. And hopefully we can build on this together. But also, like I've said, I'm not a singer. And in 40 years in this business, I've done backing vocals once in a while. But I don't know if it was stupidity or because I don't have that kind of ego. But I was like, everyone's been asking me for 40 years, well, when are you going to sing anything on an album? I'm like, I'm not, because I'm a horrible singer. So I decided on the half of the track with Harris that he's going to do the first half. I'm going to do the second half. And for normal singers, it's a couple of hours to do a song. There was 2 weeks of me sweating bullets and doing a lot of editing, fixing, and using a lot of nice plugins to make me sound good enough to keep it. So I'm even downplaying it in most interviews. People seem to dig it. It's good, but it's not going to be a thing that comes back very often. That's for sure.
All those singers you named, Vanna and ZINDANI and Paris, fantastic artists in their own right. Jeff Paris, love those albums he did back in the 80s. You got to get him a new solo album. You got to convince him.
The deal is this. I told him, you do these songs for me, I'll do your solo album for free. Just to like really push him. I said, you do these 4 songs, we co-write them, but we're actually starting your solo album and there's no getting out of this. And he said, okay. I mean, and he really means this. I'm like, we're actually gonna start doing it song by song until we have a folder of a whole album. No deadlines, no nothing. But I know we have an incredible album in us. So yes, that is the plan.
Reset, obviously, released through Frontiers Music. Your last album was your first album for Frontiers, XXX, in 2022. Along with that release came your back catalog. How did you end up signing with Frontiers Music?
When I did the first album, 2001, I did it on a German label called MTM. And back then it was like 4 or 5 labels doing this melodic rock thing. MTM was one of the biggest together with Frontiers. So I signed a very nice deal. We made that album and it did really well. And I had already started doing albums for Frontiers with other artists. So they offered me a deal for the second one, a very nice deal. Back then when you actually still sold albums, it was pretty nice deal they offered me. So I was ecstatic and I said to MTM, well, I have this offer and I'm going to go for it. And they said, nah, you're not, because we have an option to do the next one. And I'm like, what? Yeah, you probably didn't read in the contract. We actually have an option to do your second one. I'm like, okay, well, you have to match the deal because otherwise, you know, I'm getting screwed there. And they did. So for like 20 years, we've talked about doing something. And I probably worked on, I think it's like 60 or 70 albums for Frontiers. I did the Fredriks and Denander album for them, but I've done so many albums where I write and produce or play and all of this over the years and all the time. So it was actually Serafina who contacted me and said, isn't it about time that we actually start doing this for real? Like, what are the chances of you signing with us now? Let's do 4 new albums in 8 years. Let's do your whole back catalog digitally. And like, let's build this together. And the timing was just perfect. I went, there you go. That's it. And it was like everything just at the right time fell in place. And I couldn't be happier. And I actually, for real, wrote them an email about an hour ago. because around, I don't release my own music often. I'm on albums every week because it's what I do. It's what my work for 4 years is working in the studio. So I'm always on albums, and you go, oh, it's Friday. It's another 2 or 3 releases every Friday, and it's nice. Some are big, some are not. But it's like every time you do your own thing, it's like when you actually do get the CD and you're looking at it and go, okay, well, this is my baby. So I actually wrote them an hour ago, copied everyone and said, after 40 years, I still have this weird thing. When I do my own music, I go in my bubble in this room and I get all of these ideas and they become music and I create it and they're my babies. Nobody's involved until I get some singers and stuff. Only when I'm done and I'm sort of giving it to the label, I'm going, oh, that's true. Now it doesn't belong to me anymore. Now it becomes the property of the label, and they're gonna release it, and it becomes something for anyone who cares in the world to listen to it. And I always keep forgetting this when I work in the studio. But having a great label and this fantastic team is why it's so amazing to do this, because every day, all the work they do. So actually, I wrote them a very nice email an hour ago just to like really thank everyone for, taking my whatever work I do in this little room and making it a global magical bubble together, on whatever level it is these days. It's not the old days of rock and roll, but it's still doing pretty good. So I couldn't be happier. I'm very happy. But I've always have a good relationship with. I've done so much with Escape, who released the 4th album, and I still do a lot of work. I produce albums for them right now, and Pride and Joy in a lot of these labels, and I'm blessed. I'm very thankful. I sometimes forget that I'm lucky enough that I always have these labels to work with, and I have friends who chase record deals, and I'm kind of sometimes take it for granted that almost anything I want to do, I just do with these people all the time. So I'm very humble and very thankful for the situation.
Well, it's good that you're humble. I feel, kind of the songwriters sort of take a backseat to the name of the band or the name of the artist. And I've seen your name on numerous Frontiers releases, much like the other guys that they have that write a lot of songs like Giancarlo Floridia and Alessandro Del Vecchio. I feel like songwriting gets kind of pushed to the back. I mean, it's just important. I mean, you're getting it out there, and it just seems like, the focus is on the name on the label.
Well, and you're absolutely right. But it was also my decision, because 40 years ago, I was signed with my first band, a hard rock band in Sweden called ATC. And we were a real band, and we kind of blew up a little bit together with the band in Europe, Swedish band Europe, and some other bands. And we were in all of the cool magazines and everything. And I was that little 15-year-old, the wonder kid that everyone talked about with a guitar. But I also grew up with the guys in Europe and these guys. And whenever we were hanging out, all they talked about, oh, you need to get your hair like this and buy these clothes and you be a rock star. And it was this voice inside of me that went, that's not me. It's not who I am. I looked at these guys, and me and John Norum from Europe, we used to hang a lot. And I'm like, I looked at him, and he was such a great player and everything. But he was like a rock star guitar player, and still is, and all those guys. I was more into the studio musician world already from like Toto's first album in '78. I was 10 years old. I was so into that world of producers and engineers and studio musicians and owning my own studio stuff, and even recording our first album. The guys owning the studio liked my playing, and while recording the album, they hired me to do 2 other albums while making our album. So it was sort of natural for me to get into this. But it is, if it bothers you that you do all the work that's key for some big artists, and maybe not get the recognition you deserve, then you should work harder on becoming more famous. You could be a Desmond Child kind of writer if you're lucky and being successful, or then you probably need to be an artist. I kind of like the fact that a few weeks ago there was like a cover story in the local paper here where I've lived my whole life. And of course, friends and family go like, "Oh, I saw an article, beautiful article, you know, nice pictures, me and Johnny Depp and everyone." There's been 2 people since that one came out in my little hometown at the grocery store going, "Guitar player?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Oh, cool." And they walk away. It's like, and I kind of dig that because I've done a lot of work with Alice Cooper for 13, 14 years, something. And I co-produced a paranormal album. We worked on it for 11 months, he and I and Bob Esserin. So while hanging with Alice in the States, you can walk down like the smallest back street in Nashville with 2 houses, and there's people coming running. "Oh, we're not worthy," you know, all the time. And he's the nicest, most gracious person with everyone ever. But I've been around super famous people. I've like extremely famous people, and I've seen them handle it in different ways. Alice is amazing, and most of them are, but some are. Even though if they handle it, it's like, I don't want that life. I love being somebody that I'm, like I say, and it's true, I'm just a geeky dad. You know, that's, I hang with my daughter's, you know, her best friend's parents. We're hanging in the park, and it, I think they forget what I do, and then an article comes out with me and the Toto guys and Alice Cooper and Johnny Depp and everyone, and then they're like, oh yeah, that's what you do actually. So it's like, yeah, but it's my work. I did the last Hollywood Vampires album. I worked a lot on that, and I played live with them a few times. So during that process, there was one thing we worked on, and Johnny Depp was calling me to Sweden, and on a short FaceTime call, and we were actually in the summer. We were at my daughter's friend's place because she was having a birthday. So there's like 6, 7 parents and a lot of kids running around. And my phone rings, and I take it, and the mom next to me sees that it says Johnny Depp, and she goes, "Really?" And I answer, and it's like I forget about it, and she sees Johnny. I'm like, okay, everyone says hi, and I have to, because there is, again, it's just people. It's just normal people. You know, they have freaky jobs. But it's just humans that in the end of everything. So I dig what you see behind me is my whole world. I've said it all along, a way too long answer for every question. I've said it all along. My music my songs live a much cooler life than I do. Because with Alice, they toured the world. With Overland, they played Firefest this week. And then my music is out there. It's good enough, you know. Even my daughter looks at all the gold records going, "Dad, you have really weird pictures on the walls." So it's a weird life. That's what it is.
Now, I saw a trailer for a Radioactive documentary. There was a teaser back at the end of 2020. Has this been released yet?
It's not been released, but I've been working on it for so many years. Again, freaky that you asked, because I was actually, a fan just wrote me on Instagram and said, "Do you have the lyrics for the song Summer Rains that Jimmy sang?" And I'm like, "I think I have it somewhere." And I was looking through my hard drive, and I saw all the video clips for this documentary. It's basically everything is done, but it's so massive with everything. And when I started it, there was a chance of doing it on a DVD because you were still selling DVDs. At this point, you really don't. So yeah, I could release it on the iTunes kind of thing digitally, which would be nice. But I also now have a friend that works for Netflix and HBO and some of these places. So I'm like, I think I want to try to finish it and see if they want to do something with it. Because I filmed the Toto guys with me in 1991. I have 40 minutes of us recording the first album. And everyone after that, and so many interviews, and a lot of people aren't even alive anymore. I have so much stuff with Jimmy Jameson and the Pocaro guys that are you know, people have passed away, and it's like, it's more than 30 years of pretty cool stuff in there. So it will for sure come out. I'm just gonna decide how I'm gonna put it together. So yeah.
Now, when I first heard Radioactive, as an all-star melodic rock project. I wasn't really paying attention that there were different singers. Every now and then, geez, that was different. It reminded me a lot of AOR, the Frederick Slamma project, and I noticed that you actually work with him, so it's kind of like the two kind of cross over.
Yeah, and again, I spoke to Frederick this morning because I'm doing his next album, and we laugh about it. I seriously think it's album 23 or 24 in the series of AOR albums that I've done for him. It's nobody else that I've ever worked with have I done more albums with, which is insane. And we're actually starting another one of his right after, which is a little different. But when I released the first Radioactive, Fredrik was one of those guys in interviews who said, well, my goal is to do something that's sort of like what Tommy Denander did with Radioactive. Same thing when the first work of our art album came out. In their press release, it says, well, our inspiration is our Toto and Radioactive. So when I did the first one, people weren't doing these all-star projects. It was so weird even for the people involved to go like, you're gonna have all of different singers and different people. I'm like, yeah, well, it's a once in a lifetime project, which is why I wanted everyone to be involved. It was just a once in a lifetime. So it was always talked about in a lot of big media, like, you know, this is a new kind of concept to bring all of these people into one. But he actually managed to make it work, you know, like it wasn't as, you know, shattered as maybe some people thought it was going to be with all of these people. But, you know, the red line was always my songwriting, the same kind of production, and singers that I sort of matched. But even bands like Toto, you had Steve Lukather and David Page, Steve Porcaro and Bobby Kimball singing. A lot of these, they had 3 or 4 singers on every album. So, you know, it's kind of probably worked in that way. But these days, everyone is doing a Radioactive project. It's like, how many guests can we get? You know, let's see. And for a long time, it became a thing, not only because of Radioactive, but it became a thing because of internet and everything, that you wanted a lot of special guests. And I'm always the kind of guy, if everyone's getting a tattoo, I'm not doing it. I have to go the other way. So I know I was like almost one of the first to do it. And then people follow it. And so I'm sort of going the other way now. I want maybe 2 singers to do the next album, maybe even 1. It's going to be more of a band sound with, like on this one, I had to email Tony Levin to play on the title track, because the way I produced the song was very Peter Gabriel sounding. And I know Tony, and I said, I need you to do that thing with your sticks on the finger, the bass thing you do. And he says, cool, you know, and he did it perfectly. And I've become really good friends with Keith Scott, who is Bryan Adams' guitar player. And he has worked with MUTT and knows MUTT well. And I said, I love your playing. I don't bring a lot of guitar players in anymore as guests. I've had everyone from Yngwie Malmsteen to Neil Schon to Lando to Michael Thompson to Luke. Everyone's been on it. So I said, you and I should share this song because of our friendship with MUTT. And he did a great job on it. So if you look at the guest list, there aren't that many guests anymore in that sense. And it's more of a band kind of sound to it. So on purpose.
So obviously, in between Radioactive and your own material, you're working on other projects, either in production or as a guest or some type of job within the recording process. What are you currently working on now?
Well, it's been a very cool year. I mean, I had my 3rd #1 on Billboard with Ace Frehley's 10,000 Volts. I co-wrote a song on that called Up in the Sky. And I was involved in the album early on until it changed with Steve Brown taking over, which was fine. But it was more Pepe Castro's gig with Ace and that relationship. But it was pretty cool. I have 2 #1s with Alice Cooper before that, a songwriter and producer. So that was a pretty big thing this year. But it's been one of the busiest years of my life. I've had like 6 days off since January 2nd. It's for real been that busy. It's been insane. So a million projects, Frederick Slamma, of course. I've done a very cool album with a German friend, Marty. It's called Marty and the Bad Punch. Very cool album with Tony Franklin on bass and Josh Devine on drums, and really, really cool album. Right now, I'm doing a solo album for one of my favorite singers that has been on Radioactive. His name is Jerome Mazza. He was on the Steve Walsh album that I produced from Kansas. Credible singer, and I think we have, for real, I think we have a monster album coming. It's just one of those, it just came together so fast on inspiration. I think it's going to be incredible. I produced three songs for a band called Black Paisley, a Swedish rock band that they're out doing really well. The singer and I hit it off really well, so I'm actually producing his solo album right now. His name is Stefan, a really cool guy. Doing Fredrik Slama, we're in mixing right now on his new album that's turning out good, and doing another one. But it's like, in between the songwriting and the producing and all of this, it's like I do guitar sessions every day and still do some songwriting. I have to say, one of my favorite bands of all time ever, and probably one of my biggest inspirations and favorite guitar players are Giant with Dan Huff. And the new Giant album is the first time I think that they have done an album that truly matches the first two. And I got to co-write I wrote the music for the title track, and I got to play on it. And I know that there are songs that Dan had that were never used for the Time to Burn album that they did for this. And the new setup and production team they built around it, it sounds like Time to Burn kind of stuff. And I've heard the whole album, and I'm pretty blown away by it. And Swedish singer Kent Healy did incredible job on it. So, it's one of those bands. It's not giant like the old, but it's still enough of members, and it really sounds and feels like a Giant album in this setup. So that one I'm really proud of. So it's like, usually when people ask me, so what have you been working on? I just go blank, because it's like, I can't remember. I have to start looking through folders and looking in the computer. What I've been doing, because it's 2 or 3 things every day, 7 days a week. So thankfully, very thankfully, I'm busier than ever. And I got through COVID better than most people, because I saw it coming. I changed. I cut all my fees in half. I said, you can hire me for half of what I normally cost. And I gained more than 150 new customers through COVID, because we all had a tough time. So a lot of these customers became regular customers. So it's just, it feels like the 80s again. It's that kind of workload. So, knock on wood, it's a very good thing.
I've had the singer from Black Paisley on my podcast. Fantastic last album by them. And it's nice to hear he's doing his own solo thing.
Yeah, really good band. Very, very good band. And so I did the 3 last singles that are doing pretty well. And I don't know if anything else we did might end up on the album or another single or something. But I think his album is going to be really cool. The way I took his songs and produced the demos is he felt like this is something I wanted to do for a long time. So it just became a natural thing for us to do a solo thing. He's still the singer of Black Paisley. That's his main thing. It's just fun to do a side thing for like one album or something. So.
Well, Tommy, those are all the questions I have for you. The new Radioactive album is out now. It's called Reset. It's on Frontiers Music, and you sound like a busy guy, but I'm glad you could take the time to speak with me about Radioactive and everything you have going on today.
Truly my pleasure, George. Again, I'm always here. Anyone, if anytime you want to talk, you know where to reach me.
Once again, I want to thank Tommy Denander of Radioactive for coming on the Rock is George podcast. Be sure to check out their latest album, Reset, out now through Frontiers Music. Head over to your favorite music streaming platform. Take a listen to the album. If you like what you hear, buy a physical copy. Support the artist. For all things Tommy Denander, head over to his official Facebook page /Tommy Denander Official. I also want to thank Dustin Hardman and Frontiers Music for making this interview possible. You've been great. I've been George Dionne. Discover your next favorite artist on the Rock is George podcast.